Aliens and UFOs. They fascinated not only me, but the rest of humanity for decades. But let's be real. Most of the time, the evidence we have is blurry, grainy, and shot with a damn potato. So it's hard to know what's real and what isn't. But what if I told you this isn't just any random UFO story? And what if I told you that at one point, the United States government itself admitted that they had recovered a flying saucer? Now, I've always been interested in this specific conspiracy. This is the beginning of UFO conspiracies, the Roswell incident. But to understand why Roswell is the almighty daddy of UFO lore, let me start with explaining the story from the very beginning. The year was 1947. Now, at the time in 1947, Roswell wasn't much to look at. It was just a small, but respectable town of about 25,000 people. Most of its residents were either ranchers or military personnel stationed at the Roswell Army Airfield. But other than that, it was just a small city surrounded by desert wasteland. There ain't nothing out there. I'm surprised these people even wanted to live there. Now, the story really begins on July 6th, 1947, when a rancher named Mac Brazel stumbled upon something strange on his property. Brazel managed the Foster Ranch, located about 75 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico. Now, while just being out on his ranch, he discovered a field of debris scattered across an area 3/4 of a mile long and hundreds of feet wide. Basically, this stuff was everywhere, scattered in a very large area on his ranch, which seemingly came out of nowhere. But it wasn't just the size of the debris field that was unusual. It was what he found. Brazel described the debris as unlike anything he'd ever seen. He also described the material from the debris to be a foil-like material. He said it was like thin, lightweight material, but was much more resilient than regular tinfoil. Now, Brazel, who was completely confused, and rightfully so, drove to Roswell to report it to Sheriff George Wilcox. The sheriff then followed Brazel to the ranch to examine the debris, but couldn't make sense of it either. He then decided to call and tell the local Roswell Army Airfield about the situation. So by the next day, July 7th, 1947, 2 military personnel were dispatched to the ranch. Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I just make YouTube videos, guys. The 2 men, along with Brazel, spent hours collecting the debris, carefully loading it into military vehicles. That material was then transported to the Roswell Army Airfield, where it was stored for further analysis. Then, on July 8th, 1947, just one day later, the Roswell Army Airfield made an announcement that would change everything. Walter Hewitt, the base's public information officer, issued a press release stating that the Army had recovered a flying disc. That's actually what they said. This was an official statement from the United States military. Now, if I was alive back in the day, I would have been geeking out. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, is World War III about to begin? And instead of fighting Russians, we're gonna be fighting Darth Vader?
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs, which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. Rancher W.W. Brizzell was the man who discovered the saucer.
The Roswell Army Airfield's announcement that they had recovered a flying saucer wasn't just news, guys. It was the news. It spread like wildfire. For just a brief moment, it felt like humanity might not be alone in the universe. But just as quickly as the story emerged, it was shut down. On July 9th, 1947, just one day after the story broke, Brigadier General Roger Ramey ordered a retraction regarding the retrieved flying saucers. According to the news story, the debris recovered from Mac Brazel's ranch was just remnants of a downed weather balloon. So, to reinforce the new narrative, General Ramey held a press conference at Fort Worth Army Airfield, and Major Jesse Marcel, who had initially transported the debris, was ordered to join him. Now, at this conference, reporters were shown what was claimed to be the actual wreckage, which were strips of aluminum foil, rubber, paper, and wooden sticks. When you say the government retrieved a flying saucer and then you hit me with some tinfoil, yeah, honestly, you can consider me pretty disappointed. Now, the military's retraction of the original story and staged press conference were enough to satisfy most of the public. Headlines on July 9th, 1947 announced the weather balloon explanation, and so the story of the retrieved flying saucer quickly faded from the spotlight. People moved on, believing what the government told them. After all, it was the late 1940s, and at the time, people actually respected and trusted their government. Yeah. Can you believe that? They actually trusted the government. Are you stupid? They say they have a UFO, and you're gonna act like nothing happened. You're dumb. But seriously, after the retraction, the Roswell incident, like I said, faded away. Weeks turned into years, eventually decades, with no new stories regarding the retrieved UFO. That is, until 1978, when a person very close to the incident, who handled the material and who was at the original crash site, broke his silence and gave a shocking new perspective on the Roswell incident. In 1978, over 3 decades after the incident, the one to break his silence was then retired Jesse Marcel. Now, to give some background on Marcel, he was an intelligence officer for the 509th Bomb Group at the time, and as mentioned before, he was one of the first officials to arrive and examine the debris. Anyways, Marcel was interviewed by Stanton Friedman.
This is Stanton Friedman. I'm a nuclear physicist with a very strong interest in flying saucers.
I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
Marcel's interview became an important moment in UFO lore, sparking investigations, books, documentaries, etc. His account was one of the first to challenge the weather balloon narrative publicly. Marcel would then go on to do several interviews throughout the years and gave his perspective and experience when it came to the Roswell incident.
So I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not have been.
Now, according to him, and after retrieving the debris and before taking it to the Roswell Army Air Base, he claims to have stopped by his house, dumped what he had on the kitchen floor, and showed his wife Viola Marcel and his son Jesse Marcel Jr. Now, if dude did that today, the government would not hesitate to absolutely delete you from existence. The debris included thin metallic sheets that felt light yet were extremely strong, which is pretty similar to the description of what Mac Braswell had said.
Looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hands. I tried to make a dent in this metal. He said, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it.
Jesse Marcel Jr., who was just 11 years old at the time, corroborated his father's story and said in interviews that he did later.
Well, he was, as I recall, very excited. And again, he said, I want to show you something. And he had gone out to the car and brought back in some metallic debris. I believe it was in a box. At any rate, he brought the material in and spread it on the kitchen floor. There was a lot of rather thick foil-like material, kind of not a shiny aluminum, but burnished or a slate gray type of aluminum metal. It was very light, and again, a dull metallic gray color.
The family also noticed odd-looking shapes etched into the material. Marcel Jr. claims it looked like hieroglyphics, but made out of symbols and shapes that the family had never seen before. These symbols also gave off a slight purple hue, according to Marcel Jr.
Well, the most unusual part of this whole thing was what was on the I-beam, on the inner surface of the I-beam. Because as you look at it head-on, there appeared to be a type of writing. This writing was definitely a purplish violet hue. It did have an embossed appearance because you could, if I recall, you could rub your finger on it and you could tell it had texture. I don't recall seeing any lines or letters of any kind, but it was more like geometrical shapes. That was the color that caught your eye. Here in all this mass of metallic gray pieces, here's this flash of color.
So the next day, Marcel would deliver what he had recovered to the Roswell Army Airfield, where it was quickly transported to Fort Worth, Texas.
And how long was he at your home that night with the material on the floor?
The total time there was about 15 or 20 minutes.
And what happened after that?
Loaded it back in the car and took off.
Then Marcel remained silent for decades, obeying his military protocol to never, ever speak of what he had seen. But privately, he did express his doubts about the military change of story and told his son that the weather balloon story was total BS.
We would talk about it periodically over the next several years, perhaps, and we'd always thought that it was something very unusual. I think initially they might have thought it was even a Russian weapon or something. That was for the reason for the cover up or the burying the story. But later, it was determined it was not a Russian weapon. So that left one other possibility, that it was something from out of our atmosphere.
So yeah, this is also what many theorists believe. The debris that Marcel retrieved on Brazel's ranch was swapped out before being shown at the media press conference, when the story was changed from a flying disc to just a simple weather balloon. Jesse Marcel would go on to be in several documentaries and take part in several more interviews to explain his side of the story. And his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., grew up to become a flight surgeon and an Army colonel. And he never wavered in his account of that night in 1947. In his later years, he even wrote a book titled The Roswell Legacy, where he would publish his experiences that night and defend his father's take on the Roswell incident. Well, damn, honestly, I hope if I have a son, I hope and pray little dude gets my back, just like Jesse Marcel's son had his. The discovery of strange debris on Mac Brazel's ranch and Marcel's different account of the Roswell incident was only the beginning. Just when it seemed like this was the end of the story, rumors of a second crash site began to circulate. The second crash site brought with an even more extraordinary claim though, the recovery of alien bodies. While the debris on Brazel's ranch was discovered near Roswell, New Mexico, in a remote area over 150 miles away, would soon become the focal point of an even more crazy claim.
There was a large silver disc-shaped object was embedded in the side of the ridgeline. When we got up to it, there were 4 bodies there, not human.
Gerald Anderson, who was only 5 years old at the time, was on a rock collecting trip with his family on the morning of July 5th, 1947, a whole day before Mac Brazel would contact the local sheriff about the debris he found. Now, as mentioned before, not only did Gerald Anderson see debris of a crashed craft, but also saw the bodies of beings he'd never seen before.
There was 2 of them who were obviously dead. One of them was obviously very badly injured, and one of them apparently suffered no ill effects or didn't appear to be injured. These creatures, all of them were only about 4 foot tall, 4.5 feet tall. They had very large heads that were shaped larger on the top, and they kind of tapered down. And they had very large oval-shaped or almond-shaped, I guess you could say, black eyes. They were so shiny they had almost a bluish tint to them when the light reflected off them. Their skin coloration, I think the best way I could describe that is kind of a bluish tinted milky white. They were wearing one-piece suits. All of them were dressed exactly the same, and it was sort of a real shiny silverish gray.
This is unreal, bro. He saw an alien and nobody's talking about it? Well, besides me. You should definitely leave a like and subscribe, by the way. Anderson and his family decided to examine the wreckage left behind and the beings. Anderson even recalls his uncle attempting to comfort one of the injured beings by offering him water, but the creature appeared unresponsive. What an ungrateful little shit, guys.
And as we approached, the creature drew back like this, like it was in fear of us, like we were going to hurt it. Uncle Ted was trying to talk to this thing in Spanish, and of course it didn't understand a word he said. And Dad tried to talk to it, and then they tried, sign language, and that didn't work. And
But before they could leave the area, though, Anderson and his family encountered a group of archaeologists who had also arrived at the crash site.
I heard other people talking, and I turned, and there was a group of people coming up the arroyo from out on the plains.
Enter Dr. W. Curry Holden. That's a mouthful of a name. Affiliated with Texas Tech University at the time, when he and his team, stumbled upon the crash shortly after Anderson and his family had arrived.
The craft was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was metallic with no visible seams and partially buried in the dirt. We also saw small bodies lying around the wreckage. Definitely not human.
Holden's observations of the craft and the beings matched Anderson's descriptions, which basically added credibility to both their accounts. But just shortly after, Barney Barnett, who was an employee of the Soil Conservation Service and a World War veteran, came across the crash site while on a work assignment. His descriptions of what he saw were eerily similar to those of Anderson and Holden.
I found the wreckage first, and then I saw the bodies. They were small with oversized heads and strange, tight-fitting suits. Before I could get closer, the military had arrived and ordered all of us to leave.
Barnett's account of the military's rapid response aligns with other witness testimonies. He also described armed personnel securing the area and warning all civilians present to never say a single word about what they had seen.
Here comes a military car with a big white star on the side of it, followed by a 6x, which is a military truck with a type canvas thing over it, and it's full of soldiers. They've got guns. This red-headed officer, this guy was a real butthole. He made all the threats. He threatened to have people shot. You know, we'll shoot, get away from there, this is a military secret, you know, just screaming and hollering. And he told my uncle and my father that if they didn't want to spend the rest of their life in prison, they would never say anything about what they saw there. If they ever wanted to see us kids again, they'd take the kids away, and they'd never see the kids, you know, meaning me and Victor, that we'd better keep our mouths shut. If we did not, this is what was going to happen. They were threatening people and pushing people, and
The students as well. And Dr.
oh yeah,
Westbrook.
they were hustling everybody.
Yeah, right, dude. If I saw an alien in 4K, you better believe I'm telling every single person I know.
This is 4K! How did they get you at 4K?
Now, according to multiple witnesses, when military personnel arrived, they secured the area and collected every single piece of evidence. Gerald Anderson also remembers seeing soldiers loading the alien bodies onto stretchers and taking them away. Barney Barnett, who tried to stay a little bit longer, described the military's operation as methodical and intimidating.
They weren't taking any chances. They cleaned up everything. Debris, bodies, even the area around the crash. It was like they wanted to erase any trace of what had happened.
Witnesses were intimidated into silence, and the crash was never publicly acknowledged. But thanks to the courage of individuals like Gerald Anderson, Dr. Holden, and Barney Barnett, the alleged truth about the second crash site has slowly emerged throughout the decades. I mean, this just makes sense. If I saw aliens, I'm going outside and screaming at the top of my lungs and literally telling everybody I know. Now, before I did research for this video, I didn't even know there was a second crash site. I knew of the Roswell incident, but not of any second crash. If these people are telling the truth that they saw real alien bodies, then that's crazy to me that nobody today is really even talking about these events. So this is the full story of the Roswell incident. This is allegedly what happened in Roswell in 1947. These are crazy stories, and I know. So I think now it's time to hear a more in-depth side to the government story. So as the years rolled on, the Roswell incident continued to fuel conspiracy theories, but in 1994, decades after the initial events, the United States government finally broke its silence on what really happened and decided to tell their full version of the story. They released a report that claimed to definitively close the book on Roswell. The explanation, not aliens, but a top secret military program called Project Mogul. Now, Project Mogul was a highly classified program developed in 1946 at the beginning of the Cold War. Its goal was to monitor Soviet nuclear activity by using high-altitude balloons equipped with microphones that could detect the sound waves of nuclear explosions. These balloon trains, that's what they called them, were basically giant microphones to see when the Soviets detonated nuclear bombs all the way in Russia. Now, you gotta understand, these balloons were massive, spanning over 600 feet when fully deployed, and carried radar reflectors made of balsa wood and an aluminum foil-like material, which were very similar to what Mac Brazel described finding on his ranch. So the report argued that the foil-like material and sticks found by Brazel on his ranch matched the radar reflectors used on balloons for Project Mogul. Well, what about the fact that the material seemed to be indestructible, explained by Jesse Marcel and his son?
I tried to make a dent in this metal. He said, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it.
They claimed the materials were extremely tough and durable due to the fact that they had to withstand high altitude conditions. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, maybe the debris on Brazel's ranch really was from a downed Project Mogul balloon, because to be honest, it does kind of make sense, guys. But what about the alleged alien bodies seen by multiple people? Well, the initial 1994 report actually didn't mention anything regarding alien bodies, but a follow-up report in 1997, 3 years later, titled The Roswell Report Case Closed, attempted to explain this. Now, you're probably wondering, how could the government possibly explain dead and living alien bodies? Well, they claimed they were just crash test dummies. These dummies were attached to balloons that were raised high up into the atmosphere, where they were dropped as part of a top secret project called Operation High Dive. This project was designed to test parachute systems for pilots ejecting at high altitudes, and was also used to study what high velocity impacts did to the body. Really? You really didn't know what would happen to you if you fell 2 miles straight down to Earth? Well, luckily, I'm somewhat of a scientist myself, and I can tell you, and based off my expertise, you would fucking die. But according to the second report, witnesses who claimed to have seen alien bodies were victims of time compression. That's what they called it. Basically, since Project High Dive didn't start until the 1950s, the report is claiming that witnesses have mixed up the time periods in which they saw the alleged alien bodies and actually saw test dummies from High Dive. Now, despite the government's detailed explanation, many skeptics remained unconvinced. Skeptics also discovered that the records for all outgoing weather balloons and experiments related to Project Mogul were erased or destroyed. So the report acknowledged this fact and claimed it was just part of routine administrative procedures. Now, whether the government is telling the truth or not, it's quite convenient and stupid of them to destroy documents that would prove if what they're saying is definitively true. The government's explanation centered on national security, which makes sense because, at the time, it was the very beginning of the Cold War. And Project Mogul was highly classified. If these secret projects were exposed, it could have jeopardized efforts to monitor Soviet activity and expose the different kinds of research and technology the US was working on at the time. Which, like I said, that does make sense. I mean, just because some dumbasses think they saw an alien and a UFO in the middle of a desert, that doesn't mean they're gonna expose their top secret projects that they're working on at the time. Now, with that report being released, that was it. That was the end of Roswell. But with all that being said, I did purposely leave out some crucial information to make this video, a little bit more interesting. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna give you the remaining of the information, and then from there, I want you guys to form your own opinion, and then, let me know what you believe. So let's start with the flying disc claim. Back in 1947, for whatever reason, there were tons of UFO sightings. You gotta understand that these people at the time, I don't want to call them dumb, but low-key they were dumb. Back in 1938, there was a radio broadcast that basically just read the book The War of the Worlds, and when people tuned into the broadcast, they actually thought the world was being taken over by aliens. Like, be for real.
We are deeply shocked and deeply regretful about the results of last night's broadcast.
But in 1947, there are several now declassified documents from the time of UFO cases. This is important because apparently Mac Brazel knew about the UFO craze at the time, and when he reported the debris on his ranch to the sheriff, he allegedly reported it as debris from a flying disc, which then the sheriff reported the flying disc story to the local Roswell Army Air Base. Jesse Marcel, the man who was the first person to come out with a different account of the story many years later, always claimed he was a pilot and claimed he even shot down enemy aircraft. This has been proven false though. According to military evaluations, Marcel was competent but not considered for higher leadership roles, specifically because he wasn't a pilot. General Roger Ramey has also stated Marcel has had tendencies to exaggerate his stories. I also find it weird that it took many years to pass and until he was retired when bro finally decided to tell his version of the story, which then leads into his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., who was only 10 years old at the time when his father allegedly took some of the debris and showed it off, which right there alone is already sketchy. I know it was back in the day and it was easier to get away with things, but if you brought top secret military debris to your house and showed it to your family, you'd be cooked. Marcel Jr., when he was older, wrote a book and corroborated his father's story, but that's just it. He wrote a book and gained financial and public status by agreeing with his father. I mean, if he's telling the truth, that's great, that's amazing. But if he's lying, then he's just trying to get his money up, which, trust me, I get that. I do get that part.
I like money.
When it comes to Gerald Anderson, who claims to arrive first with his family at the second crash site, the story was given years after the events took place, and his claims are even inconsistent at times. Now, there's more regarding Anderson, but I'll just leave it at that. Also, most witness testimonies are from second or third-hand parties. For example, Barney Barnett and all of his quotes that I said earlier all come from Stanton Friedman and a book written about the incident. I couldn't find a single direct quote from Barnett anywhere. All his quotes come from other people. I find it especially sus that Barnett died in 1969 and his account of the story wasn't released until 1980 in a book titled The Roswell Incident, where his account of the story is told by people he allegedly told his account of the story to. So once again, just second and third hand witnesses. In my opinion, the claim that what Brazel found on his ranch was merely debris of a crashed Project Mogul balloon, honestly guys, it makes sense. The debris was scattered within a large area, and these balloons, as I mentioned before, were massive. The debris that Brazel finds and the debris that is shown at the media press conference looks and sounds pretty similar to the debris that is used on balloons for Project Mogul. There's even a declassified document written shortly after the event literally saying the debris found was from a balloon. And the fact that there is no official documentation anywhere regarding a second crash site is also pretty telling. Before I researched this topic, I had already known a little bit about it, but after doing more research, I honestly think this one's a bust, guys. Roswell is apparently the mother of all UFO events, but in my not so professional opinion, I don't think a UFO was recovered, and I also don't think there was a second crash site. But let me know what you guys think. Now, I do want to say there was a bunch more important information regarding the Roswell incident out there, and I may or may not have gotten some things wrong. So just remember, I am a professional dumbass, and if I left out anything important, or if I got anything wrong, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Anyways, I'm honestly leaning towards the fact that this is probably a hoax and the whole UFO thing is pretty fake. Like I said, let me know what you guys think. Let me know what I should do as my next topic or next challenge. Let me know in the comment section below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I love you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!